Syndicated columnist E.J. Dionne has just written a new book, Why the Right Went Wrong. In the book, he looks at the recent history of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, from Barry Goldwater to Ronald Reagan to the Tea Party insurrection to Donald Trump and today's widening schism. I asked Dionne what it is that progressives should better understand about the ascendancy of the Donald Trump Republican candidacy.
Well, my book, Why the Right Went Wrong, has sort of two core theories in it that I think lead us up to Donald Trump. The first side is how much disappointment there is on the right. The first sentence of the book is the history of contemporary American conservatism as a story of disappointment and betrayal. And ever since Goldwater's nomination, conservative politicians have had to make a series of promises they couldn't keep. They would reduce the size of government, they would roll back cultural change from the 60s, and lately they would change the ethnic makeup of the country back to where it was, say, in 1940. No Republican president has been able to reduce the size of government. It was the same size when Reagan left office as when he took office, partly because lots of what government does is very popular, even among people who call themselves conservative. A lot of Tea Partiers say, we don't want to cut Social Security and Medicare. Now, they argue that it's because they were earned benefits, but they also tend to be people at near or over the age of 65. And you can go down a whole list of government programs where government may be unpopular in the abstract, but people actually wanted to do quite a lot of things. People don't want to roll back all the cultural change in the country, and we can't change the ethnic makeup of the country. Trump's promise to deport 11 million people. Virtually everybody knows in their gut that that won't happen and shouldn't happen. And so this sense that they've been promised stuff they weren't given has led to a series of revolts, and Trump speaks to that sense of disappointment. In the recent primaries, 60% of Republicans were telling exit pollsters they were disappointed in their own party. But there's another element to this that I think is maybe even more important, and particularly important for progressives to take on board, which is that Republicans have depended on the votes of white working class voters for decades, and they haven't delivered any tangible benefits to those voters. And there are conservatives who noticed this a while back. Conservative writers like Ross Douthat and Reihan Salam. Governor Tim Pawlenty talked about the party of Sam's Club, referring to all these blue-collar Republicans who had gotten nothing for their votes as they came to see it. And the leadership of the party really hasn't responded to that at all. Their economic program is the same as always if you look at all of the mainstream candidates, by the way, including Trump, whose tax proposals are same old, tax cuts for the rich, not a whole lot for working class voters. But Trump speaks to their anger. He speaks to their anger by talking about trade deals. He speaks to their anger by saying, I'm not going to cut Social Security and Medicare. He speaks to their anger by saying, we're going to negotiate prescription drug prices with the drug companies. And so I think that, there's a lot wrong with Donald Trump. And something veering into racism and the sense of exclusion in his rhetoric is very dangerous to our country. On the other hand, the one good that could come out of the Trump rebellion is that there are a lot of people out in the country who are hurting. They're hurting in an economy that is on the way up. Has been going up for years, but it hasn't lifted them. And I think progressives have to figure out how to speak to those voters, many of whom they will never get in an election, but whose core grievance with their own life circumstance is a legitimate grievance. And interestingly, not as different as we like to think from the grievances of African Americans who also were hurt by the economic collapse, by what happened with mortgage foreclosures. They do have interests in common. It's been a progressive dream to bring these voters together. It hasn't worked out that way. But I think it's important to speak to both sets of grievances at the same time.
I asked Dionne to comment further on the inability of either conservatives or progressives to knit together a multiracial coalition of working class people.
Well, I think there's a big difference on the two sides, which is that There are differences between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, but I think it's very clear that Hillary Clinton has taken on at least some of the lessons of the economic collapse, and that she is talking a tougher language about the outsourcing of jobs, a tougher language on bank regulation. Now, Bernie argues she doesn't go far enough, and that's the nature of the fight in the Democratic Party. But I think there's a lot less distance between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton than there is on the Republican side, and you're seeing that in the debates. Having said that, the immigration issue is an issue that really splits a potential alliance between, say, Trump voting Republicans or people voting for Trump in Republican primaries and people voting for Bernie or, for that matter, Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primaries. And those issues those aren't fake issues. That's a real difference of opinion. I also think that Bernie Sanders is winning the younger disaffected voters. I think the age cleavage is the new cleavage that we have to pay attention to, that younger voters across classes who are facing diminished opportunities in this economy compared to where young people were as recently as the 1990s. Younger voters are going with Bernie. Older disaffected voters are going with Trump. And that is partly because of differences on immigration and some of the other cultural issues. And so we need to be candid, I guess, about how hard it is to bring these groups together. I am old enough to go back to the days when supporters of George McGovern were talking about bringing in many of the George Wallace voters, again, for the same reason, because George Wallace voters included a lot of white working class voters who had legitimate grievances on economic grounds. And it's been a difficult proposition for a long time. The only thing you can say about now is things are in such turmoil, particularly in the Republican Party, that perhaps possibilities exist today that didn't exist, when Jesse Jackson was running or back in the McGovern days.
Well, thank you very much.
That's good to be with you.